The Montana woods whispered with the sound of axes and wind. Snow lay heavy on the pine branches, muffling the lonely world of a man who had long forgotten the warmth of voices. His name was Elias Boone, a lumberjack who lived in a cabin so deep in the forest that even wolves hesitated to wander near. He worked alone, spoke little, and when night came, he sat by the fire staring into the flames like they were his only friends. Years ago, he had lost his wife in childbirth. The memory burned in his heart like a scar that never healed. Since then, he had sworn off company, off love, off the world. He chopped wood by day, ate in silence by night, and when he prayed, it was only for the strength to keep going another sunrise. But fate, cruel and kind in the same breath, had plans for Elias Boone. It was a night when the wind howled like a beast and snow fell thick as flour from heaven. Elias was finishing his last cut when he saw something move beyond the tree line, a flicker of motion, weak, stumbling. At first, he thought it was a deer or maybe a lost trapper, but then he heard a cry. Faint, human, a woman's voice, trembling in the dark. He grabbed his lantern and trudged through the snow until he saw her, a girl no older than 20, wrapped in rags, her belly round beneath her thin dress. She was shaking so hard her lips had turned blue. Please, she gasped, her eyes wide with fear. Don't send me back. Elias didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask where she came from. He simply lifted her into his arms, strong as iron and gentle as the falling snow. Inside his cabin, he placed her by the fire, wrapped her in his old wool blanket, and handed her a cup of warm broth. Her name, he would later learn, was Clara Mayfield. Her brother, drunk and desperate for gambling money, had sold her to a traveling man, a brute, who'd claimed her as his wife. But when she'd found out she was carrying a child, she'd run. And the man had chased her until she'd disappeared into the woods, stumbling into Elias's world like a ghost that refused to die. For hours, she didn't speak. She only stared at the flames, tears glistening on her cheeks. Elias busied himself, chopping more wood, tending the fire, making her stew. He didn't know how to talk to people anymore, especially women, but something about her silence felt familiar. It was the kind of quiet that came from pain too deep to name. That night, as she slept on his cot, Elias sat in his chair and watched the fire die down. He could hear the wind clawing at the door, but inside, for the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Days turned into weeks. Clara stayed, her body growing weaker as her time drew near. She tried to help, sweeping the floor, mending clothes, but Elias wouldn't let her work too hard. He'd simply grunt and take the broom from her hand, muttering, "You rest. That's work enough." The way he said it, low and gruff, but with a kindness she hadn't known in a long time, made her chest ache. He built her a chair by the fire, carved smooth by his own hands, and when she smiled for the first time, it nearly broke him. It was the smile of someone who had been forgotten and was finally remembered. One evening, as snow fell silver against the window, Clara asked softly, "Why do you live alone, Mr. Boone?" Elias's axe paused mid-swing. The fire cracked. "Some men are made to be alone," he said. "And some learn it the hard way." She didn't press, but he saw the understanding in her eyes, the same grief he carried. Over time, words began to flow between them like water thawing from ice. She told him about her mother, who'd died young, about her brother who'd lost himself to whiskey and sin. He listened without judgment, and though Elias rarely spoke of himself, one night he did, about his wife, her laughter, and the baby they'd lost. "That's why I built this place," he said quietly. "Couldn't stand the sound of church bells or crying. So I came here to forget." Clara reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched his rough knuckles. "Maybe God sent me here so you'd remember again," she whispered. He didn't answer, but something deep inside him stirred. Then came the night of the storm. The sky tore open with thunder, and snow came down like knives. Clara went into labor too soon. Elias did everything he could. boiled water, lit every lantern, prayed out loud though he hadn't prayed in years. Hours passed. Her cries filled the cabin, echoing through the trees like some wild hymn of life and pain. He held her hand, wiped her brow, whispered, "You're not alone, not anymore." And when the baby finally came, a tiny, crying girl, Elias felt something break and mend inside him all at once. Clara wept, exhausted but alive, and Elias wrapped the child in his flannel shirt. "She's beautiful," he said hoarsely. Clara smiled through tears. "Her name's Hope." Elias looked at the firelight dancing in the newborn's eyes, and for the first time since his wife's death, he felt peace. He'd taken in a stranger, but she had given him something greater, a reason to live. That night, as the storm raged outside, he sat between mother and child, guarding them like they were the last light in the world. The lonely lumberjack, once hollow and broken, had found his heart again, not in love, not yet, but in the fragile warmth of hope. And as dawn crept through the frosted window, painting the cabin gold, Clara stirred and whispered, "Elias, thank you for saving us." He looked at her, his voice barely above a breath. "No, Clara, you saved me." The chapter closes with the camera pulling away from the cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, snow glittering in the pale morning sun. Somewhere, deep in the wilderness, a man who'd given up on life had just been given one back. Winter clung stubbornly to the valley that year, but inside Elias Boone's cabin, warmth bloomed like a second sunrise. The fire never went out now. Clara kept it alive even when Elias was out chopping wood. Baby Hope slept soundly in a hand-carved cradle beside the hearth, swaddled in Elias's old flannel shirt. The cabin, once a hollow echo of a man's solitude, now hummed with laughter, soft footsteps, lullabies, and the faint squeak of wooden floorboards beneath new life. For the first time in years, Elias looked forward to coming home. But though peace had found them, trouble was not far behind. It started one afternoon when Elias rode to the small trading post miles away. He hadn't been there in months, but they needed supplies, flour, salt, new cloth for Clara, and a bit of sugar for Hope. As he loaded his wagon, a voice cut through the chatter of the store. "You seen a girl round these parts?" Elias turned slowly. A man stood by the counter. Mean eyes, whiskered jaw, whiskey stink thick around him. He was tall but thin, the kind of man who looked cruel just for sport. "Name's Clara Mayfield," the man said. "Run off from me with my child. She's mine, and so's what's in her belly." The storekeeper looked uneasy. Elias's hand tightened around the sack of flour until the paper tore. He didn't speak, didn't blink. The man kept talking. "She's worth good money. Her fool brother sold her fair and square. I aim to get what's mine." Elias's blood burned cold. For the first time in years, the quiet inside him cracked open, not from grief, but from fury. He said nothing, paid for his goods, and left. But as he rode home, snow crunching under the horse's hooves, his mind raced. That man, he was coming. And if he did, Elias would be ready. When he reached the cabin, Clara was outside hanging linens in the brittle sunlight, her cheeks pink, her smile shy when she saw him. "You're home early," she said. Hope's been kicking her blankets all morning. He wanted to tell her, but when he saw her joy, he couldn't bear to break it, not yet. So he smiled instead, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, and murmured, "She gets that stubborn streak from you." Clara laughed, a soft, nervous sound. But that night, as the fire glowed low, Elias sat by the door with his rifle across his knees. Watching, listening, waiting. 3 nights later, trouble came. It was past midnight when the horses came. 2 of them, their hooves crushing the frozen ground. Elias woke to the sound and moved fast, motioning Clara to stay quiet. He peered through the window. The man from the post and another rider, both armed, circling like wolves. "I know you're in there," the man shouted. "She's mine. Hand her over, Boone, and I'll let you live." The baby began to cry. Clara clutched Hope to her chest, trembling. Elias's voice was steady. "Stay down. Don't make a sound." Then he stepped outside, into the cold, rifle in hand. The man sneered when he saw him. "You think you can hide her from me? Ain't no law out here to stop me." Elias's jaw clenched. "You're wrong," he said. "There's God's law, and a man's right to protect what's good." The man laughed and raised his gun. The shot echoed across the valley, one crack of thunder in a world of snow. The horses bolted. Elias fell to one knee, clutching his shoulder, blood blooming on his coat. But before the man could fire again, Elias pulled his trigger, one clean shot. The man dropped where he stood. The other rider fled into the woods, disappearing into the dark. Clara rushed outside, crying his name. She pressed her hands against his wound, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Why did you do that?" she sobbed. Elias winced but smiled faintly. "Because I wasn't about to lose another family." He touched her face, his hand trembling. "You and Hope, you're my reason now." She kissed his knuckles, whispering through her tears, "We're not leaving you." It took weeks for Elias to heal. Clara cared for him like he was the one fragile and new. Every day, she cooked, cleaned, tended the wound, and hummed lullabies by the fire. Sometimes he'd wake in the night and find her sitting with the baby in her arms, watching the flames. Her eyes would meet his, soft and full of something he hadn't seen in years, love. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't wild, it was quiet and strong, like the mountains themselves. When spring finally came, the snow melted into streams, and the forest turned green again. Elias built a small fence around the cabin, planted a garden with Clara's help, and carved Hope a cradle that rocked with the wind. They lived simple days, chopping wood, laughing at Hope's first attempts to crawl, sharing meals in the golden light of morning. And one day, when the lilacs began to bloom, Elias found himself standing on the porch, watching Clara hang laundry in the sun. Her hair glowed like honey, and Hope giggled in the grass nearby. It hit him then, that the loneliness that once defined him had turned into something else entirely. He didn't just have company. He had home. That night, as they sat by the fire, Clara looked at him and said softly, "You've done so much for us, Elias. I can never repay you." He took her hand. "You already have." She blinked, tears shimmering in her lashes. "How?" He smiled, "a rare, tender thing. By staying." There was silence, then she leaned forward and kissed him, gentle, trembling, certain. Outside, the crickets began to sing. Inside, the fire glowed like a promise. Months passed, and word spread that a man had died out in the woods, a wanted criminal. No lawmen came asking questions. The town folk knew Elias Boone, and they knew his heart. Sometimes, folks at the trading post would whisper about the lumberjack who'd once lived alone and now came to town with a wife and a laughing baby. "Reckon love found him," they'd say. Or maybe he found it. Years later, when Hope learned to walk and the cabin stood strong against a dozen winters, Clara asked him what he thought of that night, the one when he found her in the snow. Elias looked at the fire, then at her. "I think," he said slowly, "that the Lord sent an angel into my storm. I just didn't know it until she smiled." She laughed through tears and laid her head on his shoulder. The baby they'd saved had become the child that saved them both. As dusk fell over the pines, the cabin glowed with soft lamplight. The air was full of warmth and laughter, the sound of a hammer as Elias built a swing for Hope, the scent of Clara's bread baking, the whisper of love born from hardship. The lonely lumberjack who once lived only for survival now lived for two hearts that made his world whole. And when the wind howled through the forest at night, it didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded like life, like family, like home. If this story touched your heart, remember, love can bloom even in the coldest winters. Red Heart. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional Western stories like this one. Don't forget to like, share, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next tale that'll remind you, sometimes, the people we save, are the ones who save.